dkdynamite, and tonight we're going to be talking about the endgame of Vanguard Zombies, what to expect in the final DLC, and some other bonus announcements. Definitely stay tuned. But before we jump into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, drop a like, and make sure you have notifications on to stay up to date with everything going on in Cold War Year 2, Warzone, Modern Warfare 2, and any other future Call of Duty as well. I want to start off with an announcement regarding Juggernog Beanies. I was reached out to by an individual who goes by Perk Lemonade. Fantastic dude who put together these really authentic and warm Juggernog beanie hats for the winter, of course. And I know it's summer right now, but you know what? Beanie hats are always in style. And if you want to get a head start on picking up some winter merch, then you can do so right now with the Amazon link that I have down below. There's free shipping also going on for these Juggernog beanies, so take advantage of these while they're still available. He actually just sent me one, and it looks exactly how it does in the picture, so don't worry about that. It's nice and snug on your head. And what I'll also say is that I think people out there have been itching for some really good zombies merch lately, and I'm really happy to see that Perk Lemonade went ahead and took it upon himself to get something like this going over on Amazon. But starting off with the endgame of Vanguard Zombies. For those out there that are unaware as to what's going on in the story so far, let's go ahead and recap that a bit, shall we? With the recent release of Numa in Call of Duty Vanguard Season 4, it is seeming all the more likely that the next map, most likely round-based, will be the final chapter of this game's story. While at first, it may seem a bit uncertain as to where we go next, the intel provided in this season, alongside important revelations in Numa's main quest, give us all the hints we need to figure out what's coming next. Before we even talk about this game though, let's revisit Cold War briefly, set 40 years after Vanguard Zombies, and see what we can learn from the game about what happens to end this prequel chapter of the Dark Aether saga. I also want to give massive credit to Caljitsu for helping me put together this video. His link is also down below. Absolute storyline legend, who I hope to have on the podcast again at some point later this week. In the later seasons of Black Ops Cold War, we began getting small pieces of intel that introduced Professor Krafft and his work in demonology in the 1940s to the storyline. Two of these three pieces of intel were drawings of the runes he had found in Egypt, the rune of Kortifex, and Mexico, the rune of Bellicar. However, the third mention was actually an audio log from Dr. Strauss as he battles with his past misdeeds and the fight against the Forsaken looming in the future. Strauss, knowing he may have to make a choice to end his work researching Ethereum, is consoled by Krafft's writings as he allegedly also has to make a choice to end his life's work or cause calamity for the world. Strauss points out that, given the fact they were all still alive, Krafft made this sacrifice. The main takeaway from this is that Krafft was successful in stopping Kortifex, but had to sacrifice his research into what seemed to be demons, actually the entities of the Dark Aether, severing the connections between the two realms. This is incredibly important as it basically gives us the endpoint to aim towards as we theorize about the next likely final chapter of Vanguard Zombies. So don't worry if you guys missed out on some intel in Vanguard Zombies. Here's what's happened thus far. The entities in the Dark Aether have been fighting amongst each other since time began, even throughout the entirety of the Old Aether storyline, and all the while they were entirely, or at least in large part, unaware that there were any other realms outside of the Dark Aether. One day, however, this would suddenly all change. When Nikolai banished all the dimensions of the Aether to destroy it for good, the entities in the Dark Aether obviously took notice of the colossal amount of strange objects that suddenly appeared in their universe, forcing them to realize that they were not alone. After finding incredible devices like the Pack-Punch machine, some assumed that the species outside of the Dark Aether that created it must have been very advanced. When they gazed beyond the dimensional veil and eventually found Earth though, all they found were little more than cavemen. Despite this, some took interest in the new discovery and began to steer the course of human history. However, they were never able to cross over physically, only appearing in fire and crystal balls and the like. Eventually, Syraxis and Bellicar devised a way to interact in a more direct way through artifacts. They would create items that attempted to appeal to human cultures, and Victor created a Greek short sword as he had long observed them and bound their essence to artifacts. They could then be cast through the veil, and when picked up by a human host, they would bond with the human, being able to communicate with the entity and harness their power. Now we also have the Netherwars. Kortifex's expansionism in the Dark Aether culminated in the Netherwars, his final push to control the entire realm. This would eventually backfire though, leading to a resistance bigger than he could beat. Thanks to the masterminding of Bellicar the Warlock and Verkana the Last, Kortifex was imprisoned within his artifact and trapped in our world, with the connection between it and the Dark Aether being severed for unknown reasons. This also occurred for the other entities who had created artifacts, Bellicar, Syraxis, Nordicus, and Invictor. We can't say for sure when this happened, but given Syraxis was still interfering with Japan up until the Edo period, 1603 to 1867, we know that the connection between our world and the Dark Aether wasn't severed until sometime around there at the earliest. Now we then have the Occult Society. Meanwhile, a group of wealthy elites in medieval Western Europe would inherit the secret teachings of the many priesthoods across the world who had knowledge of these Dark Aether entities and began using this to commune with the entities themselves themselves, allowing them to learn rune magic, a method of channeling Ethereum for specific purposes that had been used for thousands of years in the Dark Ether. With their newfound power, they would become the Occult Society, and eventually compiling the Tome of Rituals as the culmination of all they had learned about the Dark Ether. By the 1920s, however, some disaster occurred within the order that caused them to go into hiding, splitting the tome pages and placing them throughout the world. Now we also have Wahrheit. Following the onset of World War II, Gabriel Krafft, a German demonologist, was forced into servitude by Wahrheit in fear of the execution of his spouse, Sasha. Wolfram von List believed that Germany's key to victory lay in mythological sources of power and was blackmailing academics like Krafft to help find them. Krafft was able to locate scattered pages from the Tome of Rituals, which subsequently led him to the dormant Dark Ether artifacts still in our world. When Project Endstation punched a hole in the Dark Ether, however, these artifacts woke up. But now we have everybody's favorite map, Anfang. Von List, having bonded with Kortifex through his artifact, was now plotting with the ancient entity. He would get Kortifex back to the Dark Ether, and in return, Kortifex would grant Von List an undead army. This operation was to begin in Stalingrad, where Von List would raise the thousands of dead Nazis from their mass graves. Krafft, deciding he could no longer stand idly by, briefly bonded with Belikar, making a plan with the scholarly demon to stop Kortifex once and for all. He sent out a distress call, which was answered by 4 Special Forces operatives who reached the professor just as Von List and Kortifex erected a barrier spell. Krafft lured the 4 artifacts to the 4 soldiers, and they began the fight against Von List. From Stalingrad, the Special Forces team were able to access various locations where Wahrheit were also operating. This included Merville, where Von List planned to defeat D-Day landings with his undead army, the Hotel Royal, where the Occult Society based their headquarters and where they used to commune with the Dark Ether entities trapped inside their artifacts, an Imperial Japanese outpost on an Okinawan island where Saraxis' artifact was found, and where Wahrheit were performing an archaeological dig. Whilst performing these operations against Von List, the Special Forces find a mysterious page of the tome trapped within a void spell and are unable to break past the magic sealing it. Belikar would repeatedly send messages to the Dark Ether until finally, her old ally, Verkana the Last, would answer, making an artifact so she could join us on Earth. Verkana creates a portal to the Eastern Desert where Wahrheit had recently blown up the remains of Kortifex's temple. That leads to Terra Maldedicta. Reaching the Egyptian desert, the Special Forces find the site mysteriously abandoned, and when overhearing radio communications from Von List, they confirm that all the Wahrheit personnel mysteriously vanished after detonating the explosives around them temple. They confirmed that all the Wahrheit personnel mysteriously vanished after detonating the explosives around the temple. What was notable, however, were the Dark Ether crystals spilling out from within, now slowly consuming the surrounding area. With Verkana's help, the Special Forces resuscitate the Decimator, an old general of Kortifex's who was punished after a failure by being merged with his own shield and having his name erased. Wanting revenge against his old master, the Living Shield joins us, and with this power, allows us to secure the tome page. Thanks to his bond with Belikar, Krafft is able to see it despite being hundreds of miles away, and with some study, realizes it contains a secret to separating Von List and Kortifex. But now we return to Numa Reborn. We now understand why Wahrheit were still excavating the area, because it also contained the relic created by Kortifex long ago. In order to stop her annoyance once and for all, Kortifex created a relic that could forcibly separate a human and a Dark Ether entity and sent it through our world. He convinced the humans on the island that their lord, who was bonded with Saraxis, was a demon possessing him, and so they used the mirror to save him. In order to find the mirror, we restore Saraxis' memories. However, this also brings back her life prior to her becoming a Sister of Agony. We learned that she was actually a member of the Dark Ether's royal bloodline, just like Kortifex, and in fact was his wife. Originally, it seemed like nothing else was more important to Kortifex than her. However, eventually this changed. He became obsessed with an object within the Dark Ether known as the Construct. According to Saraxis, and I quote, "If Kortifex and Von List gain control of the Construct, then everything and everyone, living or dead, will end up as their playthings." We then learned that Kortifex had murdered his parents in order to usurp them and become Lord of the Dark Ether himself. The reason Kortifex erased Saraxis' memories and forced her into servitude ties into this. And when Saraxis gave birth to their child and had tried to hide it, Kortifex flew into a rage, fearful that the child would one day commit partricide as he had. Alongside his punishment to Saraxis, she claims he also visited bottomless cruelty upon the child, but more on that will be talked about later. Now, what lies ahead though? Despite what some people may say, the next map after Numa has been essentially confirmed by in-game intel. Both Von List and Krafft mention returning to the Eastern Desert where Terra Maldedicta takes place. And so as many people have speculated, it's very likely that this will be a round-based map set in the locale of Terra Maldedicta. In fact, in a Dark Ether area of that map, we can actually see the Construct floating high above, and it appears in the loading screen of the map itself. The location itself, as previously mentioned, is the remains of the ancient Egyptian temple to Kortifex. In Season 4's intel, Vanguard reveals that the goal of operations there is to establish a crossover point between this world and the Dark Ether. This would allow Kortifex to bring all of his allies to Earth and fulfill his end of the bargain, giving Vanguard an unstoppable army, then following him to return home. So now we have Kortifex's endgame, or the Construct. Vanguard has expressed growing concern over Kortifex's motives as the seasons have progressed. First, he became worried when the crystals we saw ourselves in the Eastern Desert began spreading, and half-heartedly joked that Kortifex would not have to return home as Earth would soon be indistinguishable from the Dark Ether. While Kortifex counseled him at the time, and that he had no interest in a world as pathetic as ours, we actually know this is categorically untrue. We are told by Nordicus that not long after the entities in the Dark Ether discovered humankind, Kortifex ordered Nordicus, who was still on his side by then, to study us for conquest, who then ordered Invictor to learn our ways of war. Invictor himself says that he had never fully fathomed Kortifex's interest in our world. So clearly, Kortifex had a vested interest in Earth far beyond what he is telling Von List. What's even more suspicious is, in the last time we saw large crystals slowly spreading throughout a landscape, it is what Zykov was doing in Cold War's chapter of the story, and his entire reason for that was to terraform the world to be more like the Dark Ether, allowing his forces to enter our world more easily than to conquer it. Given Zykov consumed almost all the entities, it's entirely possible that he actually learned this strategy from Kortifex himself and just applied it more aggressively. In another conversation between the two, Von List begins expressing his anger to Kortifex, asking how he would have let Krafft acquire the tome page. The intel ends though with this interaction. Kortifex says, and I quote, "Then tell me, Wolfram, do you think I wanted them to get that page?" Von List replies by saying, "No, Kortifex, that would not make any sense, would it?" Reading between the lines though, it seems obvious that Treyarch are trying to draw our attention to the idea that Kortifex has planned everything out so far and is entirely using Von List to get back to the Dark Ether, where he will then betray him. What lends even more credibility to a greater plan here is a conversation between Zabala the Deceiver and Kortifex. She initially begins to question him, asking why they are wasting their time and haven't already just seized the construct. Given it is such a powerful device, Kortifex then chastises her for being so insolent, saying, and I quote, "You run that mouth far too much and see far too little. How has it escaped your notice and everything is coming together for me? Even Verkana is here to share her punishment alongside the traitors Nordicus and Invictor. Everything is proceeding exactly as I intend. How dare you even think anything to the contrary?" With all this said, we have to ask, right? How did Kortifex get banished to Earth in the first place? For those who don't know, an unknown period of time before the Vanguard zombie story begins, the resistance against Kortifex, masterminded by Belikar and Verkana, succeed in their plan to dispose him by banishing him to Earth and seemingly severing the connection between our world and the Dark Ether, also resulting in the same thing happening to Belikar, Nordicus, Invictor, and Syraxis. If Kortifex had access to the construct, which is supposedly so incredibly powerful that it can control anyone and anything, then how is it he was able to lose? One possible answer is that he didn't have access to it yet. Syraxis herself says that the construct is, and I quote, "has always been his endgame, and so perhaps it requires something that Kortifex has yet to acquire." Currently though, we can't say for certain what this is, but we can speculate. Despite him saying repeatedly that our world is pathetic and humans are worthless, Kortifex still studied our world intensely from the very moment it was first discovered. Perhaps though, it's possible that somehow Earth is required in some form to make the construct work. If this were the case, then suddenly Kortifex's motives make sense and everything truly is going according to his master plan. One factor that makes this theory appealing is one of the major loose ends in Cold War. Eddie's own master plan is still incredibly mysterious, however we know it requires a stable gateway to the Dark Ether as a major piece, and that is called Project Janus. Janus was the Roman god of beginnings, endings, doorways, time, and duality. If the construct, the source of ultimate power, needs two worlds to be able to be used, then perhaps it is a vital part of Project Janus. What is interesting about the construct is its similarities to the MPD from the old Ether storyline. What makes this even more interesting is that, for those who may not remember, the Ether Pyramid was built by a small group of keepers after they began experimenting with the Dark Ether. It's therefore possible that an entity within the Dark Ether informed them about the construct and its overwhelming power, and it inspired them to make a device that was capable of the same power but for the Ether instead. This would theoretically make the construct the true cause of the entire Ether storyline. Some of you may also notice that, if this was the case, we would once again have a Richtofen striving for a source of ultimate power, which is a sort of thematic parallel that Treyarch loved. But for the end of Vanguard Zombies, we know at the very least that Kortifex is stopped and our entities return to the Dark Ether. The proof of this is not only that Zykov says he consumed gods, but that he literally uses some of the Vanguard field upgrades in his boss fight, such as Energy Mine and Frost Blast. Furthermore though, in his journal, which is at least partially true, his first encounter with an elder god is him writing, and I quote, "Found one of the big ones dead today," and we now know that Zykov grew stronger by killing consuming creatures in the Dark Ether, so it is possible that this dead one was actually Kortifex, and Zykov only gets this large initial boost to his power by finding the remains of our final battle from Vanguard zombies. It's definitely possible and would help to explain how one human was able to defeat millennia-old entities. Furthermore, given what Strauss says about Krafft, it's possible that he literally sacrificed his life to seal the Dark Ether in regards to Mr. Peaks and COD 2024. Addressing the elephant in the room here, why is Mr. Peaks, the bunny rabbit, still in the mystery box? At first, given context clues in Cold War, the implication seemed to be that Mr. Peaks was Samuel, Eddie's son. However, this isn't the case anymore, but it doesn't totally disprove the theory either. In the child's notes from Cold War, we see a drawing of Mr. Peaks on burned paper with writing around it. The two most important pieces, however, are, and I quote, "Mr. Peaks lives in my hat," as well as "Mr. Peaks keeps me safe in the dark place." The first is a reference to what Richtofen and later the Forsaken say, where being all out of rabbits means you have no escape. If Samuel has a rabbit in his hat, it means that he is safe. Equally, the second one is self-explanatory, that Mr. Peaks is keeping the boy safe in the Dark Ether, but wouldn't that mean that Mr. Peaks is alive? Siraxis mentions that Kortifex did something unbelievably cruel to their child. In the same map where we learned this, we have Mr. Peaks showing up not just in the box, but in his own side Easter egg too, all the while accompanied by the laughter of a child. Kortifex clearly has the power to change the physical form of something as he turned the Decimator into a shield. If that's the case then, could he not easily turn his child into a toy bunny rabbit? Going into the next game then, this would mean that Samuel is bonded with the Dark Ether entity just like we are in Vanguard with the artifacts, and is possibly even a powerful entity within the Dark Ether itself. With Samantha now in there and Zykov inside the containment sphere, possibly along with the other Vanguard entities, it seems like there may well be a battle of two Sams within the Dark Ether.